You've entered BOOKSTORM with Kristen Civiletto and me, Chris Storm. This is a podcast devoted to best-selling books that matter, books that make a difference. We're diving down deep with beloved authors about their stories. We're exposing hot-button topics and heartfelt themes, the issues that affect each of us in our own lives, as siblings, parents, partners, friends, as human beings. We're braving new ideas, fresh thoughts, hard lessons, and important truths. Those kinds of things that stay with us long after we turn the last page and close the book. So welcome back to BOOKSTORM Podcast. All of you avid readers, we're very thankful that you're joining us here again. We know why you're here. We're bringing you the very best fiction out there. And guess what? We found one. It's amazing. You want a psychological thriller? Go no further than this. I am telling you, we're thrilled to have Carter Wilson here with us today. Carter, welcome.
What a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me on.
So we're here to talk about your new release. Tell me what you did. Before we dive down into that, we like to tell our listeners just a little bit about you. So you are a USA Today best-selling author. Congratulations. Do you have 10 standalone psychological thrillers now, or will this be 11?
This will be my 10th.
Okay, 10th. Congratulations. Also, you're writing some short stories, so I hear.
Yep, from time to time, I do short stories. It's not my strength, but it is good practice for sure.
Okay, well, I love this in your bio, and I have to tell our listeners. In 2003, when you were trying to ward off boredom during a continuing ed class, they had an exercise that you wrote and evolved into a 400-page manuscript. Is that
Right.
what happened?
Yeah, well, it was a self-guided exercise. I was just bored, so I posed myself a riddle to pass the time. So I just made up a riddle, wrote it on a piece of paper, a little murder mystery riddle that just happened to pop into my head. And then I spent the last couple hours of this boring class trying to figure it out. Couldn't figure it out. And, like most writers that I know, very tenacious and stubborn. So I just spent the next several months trying to figure out the answer to this riddle, which became my first book. My first book that never sold. My first 3 books never sold.
Okay.
But it's where I learned, oh my God, I love this. I love this. I have no experience or background doing this, but I want to spend the rest of my life doing this.
Well, obviously, if you sat down and wrote a 400-page manuscript, and you know what? I always say, I don't think you can teach art that includes painting, writing, drawing, but you can fine-tune it. But I think you have to have it inside you. So obviously you do. We're glad you found it. And as a result, you have International Thriller Award finalist 5 times. Oh my goodness. Or you've had the Colorado Book Award 5 times. And your works have now been optioned for television and film. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we've optioned my 5th novel, Mr. Tinder's Girl. So, it's been going on for years, and what my agent always says is just don't even think about it, because the odds of something actually ever happening are so slim. So it's it's exciting, but we'll see.
Hey, be positive. This would make a great movie. This would be a fantastic film. And then, as if that's not enough, you are hosting a podcast called Making It Up. And I want to thank you for this. You are the founder of Unbound Writer Company, which provides coaching services, online classes, and writer retreats. Hey, thanks for giving back and doing that to people who would like to be a writer.
Well, yeah, I appreciate that. And I love doing it. And the truth is also, full-time writers, it's a struggle. It's a struggle to pay the bills sometimes. So you have to figure out other avenues. And I just love to teach and run retreats. And I just love conversations with writers, which is why I do the podcast. That's
fantastic. Okay, now you're living in a Victorian house in Colorado, and you're telling us it isn't haunted yet?
Yeah. Well, I always love the idea that what if I get to be the first ghost to haunt this place? It's got to start somewhere.
Yes,
so I'm working on my resume for it.
Well, there'd be no better person, because when we read this book, Kristen, I said, Kristen, who is Carter Wilson? Because this book is terrifying. And so, yeah, you're a good one to haunt it, I think. Let's hope for that.
Listen, my house growing up had the same windows as the Amityville Horror House, and it was a big white story too.
You're lucky.
Colonial. Oh, it was freaky. I was too young for that. Well, we are here to talk about your 10th novel that we just absolutely loved, as Chris said. I'm going to show our listeners on YouTube, Tell Me What You Did. And I like to give our listeners something of the background of what's going on in the story. And if you want to add anything, please do. I'm not going to give away any spoilers, which is hard to do. So I'm going to keep this kind of brief. We meet Poe Webb in your story, and she is the host of a very popular true crime podcast. Now, these are popular, we know, but this one's a little different, because in this podcast, people can call up anonymously and talk about the details of a crime that they committed. I thought this was absolutely brilliant. Now, she doesn't guarantee that the police or the FBI or somebody's not going to come calling, but it does give them this forum that, for whatever reason, has struck a chord with people. And usually she is able to, put aside what she has heard and move on to the next person. But one day she gets a call, and she has a very strong reaction immediately to this caller about somebody who claims that they killed her mother. I'm not giving anything away, because that is on the back,
all
right?
on the back cover copy.
Okay, because that's kind of the setup for what we're talking about. What's interesting is this person feels familiar. There's something off here. And one thing that she knows for sure is that this person could not be her mother's killer, because she killed that person. Right. Now, her listeners do not know this. So this is the setup for a pretty unbelievable story that unwinds from there. Did you want to add anything to that backdrop?
No, I think that about sums it up. And it's interesting. We always had these conversations with my editor about, like, because on the back cover, it does say she killed him. So that she's got this crime, her own crime, that she's never confessed to in her past. I'm like, do we say this on the back cover? Do we not? And we decided to put it in there. So but it doesn't really give too much away, but I think it identifies the stakes.
Absolutely. And the twists and turns, they are coming. So you're exactly right. It's a good call.
Mm-hmm. I loved it. And
Good.
So I'm sorry to say this, Carter, but this is a podcast, and I can't help but to ask you, is there anything you'd like to confess here?
Well, I wear my truth on my sleeve in my podcast, so I can't imagine there's anything that I haven't yet confessed to on my podcast. I'm very open, so but nothing as broad as or damaging as what Poe did.
I'll tell you, the whole notion of this podcast is fascinating. And I don't think it's giving a spoiler to give a name. I think it's the first or second chapter. We meet Ian Hindley. He claims to be Poe's mother's killer. He forces Poe to retell the memory of the night her mother died in explicit detail, because she witnessed portions of it. Now, all of this seems cruel, torturous, but the reader couldn't help but believe that Poe, who refused to talk about this moment with anyone all her life, hadn't entered maybe some weird and twisted sort of therapy session. Yeah. I felt like at some points, this was helping her as much as it was hurting her. Am I crazy for thinking that?
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, and I don't think about these things so much because I don't outline, so I don't know where anything's going. But as you progress through a book, you hope your subconscious is working and that things are starting to bubble up. And it started to occur to me, I'm like, oh, this is why she even started the podcast, was to talk to other criminals, to get into their minds, to understand them, making a connection. What we see as maybe entertainment in it, she sees as identification and, some kind of ability to not blame herself, even though what she did was in her mind justified. But yeah, so I think it is therapeutic.
And I want to say for our listeners, so we have not all, or will all of us ever commit a murder, but we have all seen death up close and personal in many different ways. Was it more difficult for her to look back on that murder because it was not quick and neat, like the being hit by a car and instantly dying, taking a poison and instantly dying? There was suffering involved. Does that give you a whole different perspective on the ability to look back and face something in your past like this?
Yeah, I mean, it's so traumatic that I think and she was 13 when she witnessed this. So I think the natural reaction is that you just suppress that. Your mind goes into protection mode. But we all know that pushing that down ultimately is the wrong thing to do, even though it's the only comfort that you can find. And so you eventually have to deal with it. So this is kind of the universe coming back to Poe and saying, now it's time to deal with your past trauma, and you're either going to get through to the other side or it's going to be the end of you. But you can't just, keep on, thinking that it's just something that may or may not have even happened. So it's forcing her to deal with it.
It's powerful. Thank you.
Now, Carter, aside from this being one of the scariest books that I've read in a long time, it was also a fascinating study in intimacy. And I thought it was interesting because Poe is interacting with strangers, through technology, and she can control the level of intimacy. And she often did. Now, I won't give away how, but she certainly did. But her relationship with her partner was very different. And I wanted to read a quote from something that her partner, Kip, said to her. But there's a space between us. And for all the time we've been together, it's never even narrowed, much less closed. And the deeper I fall for you, the more that space matters. Is that the effect of secrets, that they are intimacy killers?
Yeah, 100%. Right. And we all think that we're expert at hiding secrets. And the truth is we're not. It's when you're harboring a secret, there's an energy that comes off of you and people feel it. And those closest to you notice it the most. And what's interesting about this is Kip in the first draft was not her partner. Kip was just an employee. And we kind of looked at it and like, we need to see there was just some kind of intimacy missing in the book. And so they became partners in subsequent drafts. And I started writing, I'm thinking like, yeah, no, they aren't as close as he wants them to be, because she just has built up, these barnacles over time that does create this gap between them. And it's only through kind of addressing that trauma that you can kind of clean those away. But she's been unwilling to do that until she's forced to.
Yeah, I thought that was great too, because, on the outside, she was doing the things that somebody would indicate they love somebody, acting affectionate towards them. But he knew,
Right.
Kip knew there was something. And I think
the closer
you're right.
you get, the more you sense it.
I think that's spot on.
Oh, good.
There was something that hit me really strongly, and I'm going to say this for all of our listeners and readers, because I think we all experience this. It was, Ian talks about confirmation bias. Now, what this is, the mind tricks you into believing that something, that a lie or false is true, just so that you can have satisfaction or closure. Okay, like for example, let me tell our listeners, like a jury wants you to believe the defendant is guilty. We all want to believe that the evil person did something horrible, whether maybe they did or didn't. We do this in the real world. We look for false truths sometimes to satisfy us. And it really made me think long and hard about that. That's a very interesting concept. Have you found that in your own life? Why did you insert this in here?
I mean, I've always been interested in the concept of bias, and there's many different flavors of bias. Recency bias, for example, is another thing that happens very often. But we can look no further than our country to see we all seek out those beliefs that support our own, and to the detriment of being open-minded to other opinions and other thoughts and the actual facts sometimes. And because of that, it really dictates how we move through life. And you can move through life in a very ignorant fashion because you've only sought out those things that support your own belief system. So I've always just been interested in that because it's more than just a bias. It ultimately manifests itself into, actual physical acts, actually how you interact with others, how you present yourself to the world, and how your message is received. So it's just an interesting psychological trait that I've always been a little bit fascinated by.
Mm-hmm. It made all of us think about how we're doing this in our own lives, and actually the danger of it. When we refuse to face the truth because we want a certain answer so badly. Very intriguing.
Oh, good. Yeah, we're all guilty of it. Mm-hmm. And if you can actually go to websites which will kind of walk you through tests about your own bias, and you will be amazed of like, oh yeah, I totally do this. And I think sometimes it's okay because sometimes we simply just need that comfort. We need to release the anxiety by by being like-minded, but it can be dangerous.
Yeah, that's for sure. I wanted to ask you, Poe and her father spent a great deal of time talking about coping and also trying to cope with the circumstances that were unraveling. And I loved her father's role in this. But at one point, he tells Poe to reframe loneliness as solitude and that it's important to, quote, get your mind right. Now, it occurs to her at this point that she has been trying to get her mind right for, 17 years.
Mm-hmm.
And she wonders, how far from center does your mind need to travel before it never again course corrects? And I wanted to ask you, do you think she got dangerously close to that point?
Yeah, I think we all do. Because we all change as we age regardless, right? And I think what typically happens is we push further into the fringes of solitude. And you can receive that however you receive that. Like you can be very happy and have a solitude existence, or you can be downright lonely. And loneliness is an epidemic. And in my opinion, the cause of many ills and problems throughout the country, throughout the world. So you can go far enough where we'll never be where we were when we were 20, right? In terms of our social interactions and things like that. But you can go so far down the rabbit hole that, again, and that has a lot to do with confirmation bias, because you are just seeking those things that you agree with. And that might just be, I watch this one channel on my TV, and that's where I get all my news from. And I'm just here in this existence and I'm lonely. And it is like, how do you come back from that? I think Poe got dangerously close. and all it would take is Kip saying, I'm done. This you can't connect with anybody. You're not addressing your past, because he didn't know about her past. Her father didn't know about everything about her past. So you're setting yourself up to be very lonely because you're not allowing anyone to reach you.
Yeah. And I think too, I was thinking we don't understand enough about trauma to even understand what is too far from center,
Totally.
because now we're starting to see, for example, social media and how the impacts might push people too far. What is too far?
Right.
So,
I mean, and usually you're not the best judge of that, right? It's somebody else who's judging you for that. And I'll just say, I'm a big fan of therapy, and I think, people, just the mere act of talking and sharing, regardless of with whom it is, staunches the bleeding of that effect quite a bit.
Yeah. Oh, Carter, we love talking to you about this book. And before you go, I just want to see maybe if you can give us a little clue of what's coming up next for you. I know it's hard to share any details, but maybe
yeah. Well, it's a good question. I don't really know. I've got a YA thriller that I co-wrote with a friend of mine that's on submission, and then I'm almost done with the first draft of something new that is also a very angry, solitary book that takes place in the span of about 4 hours up in the mountains of Colorado. So I have no idea if anyone's going to want it, but I'm having a blast writing it.
Oh, that sounds so cool. It's one of my favorite places, the mountains of Colorado, and looking at some of those old abandoned mines. So that sounds
yeah.
very
This is all pretty creepy.
Oh, I
That
can't
sounds
wait.
great.
Well, I want to tell our listeners too how to get in touch with you. You have a great website. It's carterwilson.com. And you're also on Facebook, on Instagram, on TikTok, and soon we hope the big screen. So we are so thrilled for you. And we just love talking about this book. It was entertaining and scary. And I think our listeners are just going to absolutely love it. Thank you for coming on the show.
Kristen, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So good to meet you.
Take care now.
Loved it.
Bye.
Yeah, Kristen, this is going to go down as one of my all-time favorite thrillers. I really encourage everybody to pick it up. It's one of those terrifying thrillers that actually has real life possibilities inside it. And I do love this podcast where you call in and confess murders or crimes that you've done. He could be onto something there.
He sure could be. And in fact, I want to take a moment to talk about podcasts for a second, Chris, because Chris is making a transition into the publishing world with her own imprint and brand. And Chris, you want to tell us just a few words about that?
I'm super excited, and I hate to leave, but 3 years and 200 authors, and I feel like I need to launch and get some books out, help some other authors get some books out. # Books That Matter. It's going to be under Chris Storm Books. Everything is getting set up now with editors and book cover designers and mentors and all kinds of great stuff. So I wish Kristen the best. Keep listening to Kristen. Wait to see the winter and spring lineup. I've got a glimpse of it. It's going to be great. And of course, we're going to be keeping in touch.
Absolutely. We're very proud of Chris, and we wish her all the best, of course. And we can't wait to have her on the show to talk about her books too. So that's something also to look forward to. Well, let's talk about a couple of those other authors that we have coming on board. We've got Alex Hay with The Queen of Fives, Fiona Davis, The Stolen Queen. We've got Jill Shalvis, Better Than Friends, Mark Greaney with Midnight Black, Marshall Karp, Don't Tell Me How to Die, Tess Gerritsen, The Summer Guest, Robert Cray, The Big Empty, Brian Freeman writing for Robert Ludlum, The Born Vendetta. We got Robert Dugoni coming back with Hold Strong and 2 other authors, and Elka Joshi with 6 Days in Bombay. Many of those are returning authors. As you know, we're very excited about them coming back. We continue to grow every week. As you know, we are on, I think, 94 different territories and countries where we have listeners, 2,000 cities, all 50 states. We're so excited about what's happening and some of these upcoming changes for both Chris and for Bookstorm. Until then, you can find us on Facebook, on Instagram, on X, on TikTok. We are on YouTube, of course, where you could see everybody. Just go to Bookstorm and podcast, and we should come right up. Till next time, listeners, one of the best ways to brave the storm is to dive down deep into life-changing fiction.